Solo travelers, what is your creepiest travel story? Almost got mugged in Paris on the steps of Sacré-Cœur. Surrounded by 5 assailants, and had no choice but to shout at the top of my lungs. As soon as I did, they scattered. Was riding a bicycle from Bangkok to Hanoi, solo. Met hostile behavior in rural Cambodia, no judgment, they've been through it, but Vietnam was so friendly I completely let my guard down. By the time I made it to Ho, mid-Vietnam, I'd been invited back to people's homes several times, and was in love with the country. I didn't realize who is known for scams. The DMZ has been through it too, obviously. A dude on a motorbike intercepted me on my way into town, and showed me a hotel, took me out to eat. Spent 3 days as my friend and tour guide. This is somewhat normal. English teachers want to practice with a native speaker. It's very tough for even fluent Vietnamese people to compete with native speakers for teaching jobs. On the day he knew to be my last in town, he rolled up a joint, and we smoked it. He dropped out after 2 hits, saying he was lightweight. I remember thinking it was weak ass weed, and then I remember tripping balls as he rode in circles with me on the back of his motorbike, waiting for whatever drug to kick in. I recall thinking I was having so much fun, I'd never forget that night. This was laced weed, my tolerance was fine, I'd been smoking weed since I crossed out of Thailand. Don't fuck with drugs in Thailand. He brought me to a food truck next to an ATM and kept doing magic tricks with money, to my hallucinogenic amazement. Then he needed to borrow my bills for the next trick, and that continued until I realized I was out of money. He'd been returning smaller bills after each trick. I was so messed up I realized nothing, so I went to the ATM and pulled out more money until he'd stolen all of that too. When I'd try to count my money, he'd crane his neck to stare into my wallet, to make me too uncomfortable to continue. He was taking advantage of a common dynamic. Here, the friendly Viet people would often try to look into a Westerner's wallet. They've heard we are rich, and they are curious, and they don't seem to share our concept of shyness. When I finally got angry, I still didn't realize I'd been robbed. I figured that out the next morning. But I was mad, and I grabbed his shoulder, and he went limp, and held eye contact with me. Think submissive dog on its belly, I couldn't escalate. As soon as I let go, he disappeared. I've since realized this was his full-time job. He got like $140 off me, easily a month's salary, for him. Every step was rehearsed, from the friendship to the tour guide to the laced weed to the wallet stare to the de-escalation technique. I would have paid him for the tour, and I would have paid him for the drugs. $140 would have been a rip-off, but you get used to that when you travel. I just wish he hadn't stolen my trust of the amazing people of Vietnam. Who knows how many experiences I missed in the final 400 miles of my trip. In Argentine Patagonia, almost got hunted by a puma. It was dusk, and I was overlooking the lake when I heard rustling behind me in the tree line. I kept staring for a while before I saw it, and thank God I didn't make a run for it as it would have been my initial reaction. Instead I started yelling and cursing and throwing rocks at it as I had been told to do by the locals, and it left me alone. That night I kept a fire lit until late in the evening, and then went to sleep with a flashlight on and my knife at hand. And that's not to sound badass, I never used it to hunt, and I was scared as shit. In 2016 I hiked from NJ to Virginia on the Appalachian Trail. I was on the part of the trail known as the roller coaster not far from Harper's Ferry. I hit heavy rain, the trail became a stream and all my rain gear decided to give out. Everything I had was soaked. I had to spend the next day waiting for my gear to dry out at the nearest shelter. Around noon I can see someone walking intersecting to the trail. I can tell he is not hiker, being he had no bag and was wearing jeans. He told me his name was Steve. He starts asking me if I know Chris or Jim. Being that no one uses regular names on the trail, there would be no way to identify them, even if they were real people. Steve said he walked from DC, 80 miles, and was told to meet Chris and Jim for further instructions. He said he had information, and the NSA was after him. I figured the guy was having a mental break, and felt sorry I couldn't help him. Not too far off was a free hiker hostel, maybe a 4-hour walk. The hostel was just a shelter that was enclosed with a wood burning stove. But next to it was a house that a ridge runner, does trail maintenance, lived at. I directed him towards that. After all my stuff dried out, I headed to hostel and got there early evening. As I'm walking up, I can see the ridge runner and Steve arguing. The ridge runner is yelling at Steve, telling him to take a trail to a road and to leave this area. If he did not, the ridge runner would call the police for trespassing. At the shelter I saw familiar people who filled me in on what happened. At every shelter is a trail log. The log is journal that keeps track of people who pass through and notes about what's happening on the trail. It is also a way to pass messages to people you might know behind you. Steve got a hold of log and started looking for a message for him. He thought he had to decode the messages to find instructions for him. Steve started to write random things and crossing things out through the log. This action pissed off people who were already wary of Steve because of appearance of not being a fellow hiker. Steve also argued with a few people before this and made a fire to burn some paper he was carrying. They notified the ridge runner. People were pretty upset about Steve, so I never told them that I ran into him previously. I never saw Steve again and still think he was a person with mental issues having a episode. However, I do imagine the scenario where he was telling the truth and what his story was. I spent a week in Dusseldorf traveling around and never encountered anything creepy. Get to the airport for my flight home and started getting followed by a border control man. He ends up swapping with another person for the security part, meaning I had to go through his security bit. The whole time he's asking me personal thing. Do you like Turkish men? Would you like to go to dinner with a Turkish man? Where are you from? How many Turkish men are near you? I know loads in Scotland. I'm assuming the man was Turkish after these questioning. I ended up having to get patted down and he made sure to watch. By this point it was beyond uncomfortable. Once I was finished, he continued to follow me through duty free. I start walking faster to get away from him. Have lunch with me, he starts shouting down the airport. I jump straight on my phone and call my dad and hid behind a shelf in duty free till I saw him walk past trying to find me. Stayed hidden in the toilet till my flight was boarding. I was staying in a B&B in Donegal Island where every room on the floor shared a bathroom. I went in one morning to pee and there was a man with his pants around his ankles asleep in the bathtub. The soap dish and towel rack were all torn off the wall and it appeared he had fallen over while relieving himself and fallen in the tub. While struggling to get out with his pants down, he had torn things from the wall. He then proceeded to pass out. I woke the man and helped him from the tub, after which he proceeded to hug me and declare me his hero. And this is how I ended up embraced by a drunken Irishman with his pant around his ankles. Traveling in Asia at the time. I got a tuk-tuk to go to the center of a village with a young driver. We started driving and he turned around while telling me he wouldn't take me to the center of the village because he knew a better spot in the jungle, a place he and his friends loved. I told him no, I want to go to the center of the village and that's it. He got angry and sped up while I was considering my chances of just jumping out. But then he also grabbed my arm in a tight grip, so I knew for sure no good would come from the situation. Luckily for me, I had an umbrella with me, and with my free hand I started slamming him with it as hard as I could till he stopped the vehicle and he offered me to take me to the center of the village. Lol. No. I ended up walking 3 hours to the village. I had planned one more day there and was constantly confronted by people that I was the girl who attacked the tuk-tuk driver offering me rides. Pretty sure they were his friends. I strictly stayed in busy areas till I was able to take a train out. F that situation. For me it was when I was driving from Georgia to California to visit a friend. I didn't want to fly because I wanted to sightsee on the way. When I got to San Diego, the hotel I booked on Expedia screamed, "Run" from the get-go. But I was exhausted and wanted to rest. Got my room key and checked in. I locked the door, and because I'm always on guard, I locked the bar on the door for extra safety. About 4 AM I was sleeping and heard someone trying to come in my room. They had opened the door, but couldn't get past the little bar that was locked. I quickly got up, threw clothes on, and went to the door to see what was going on. Two guys outside the door with their hand in the slit of the door yelling at me. They kept saying, "Come here pretty girl." Oh, a pretty face, or something like that. I called the front desk to see what was going on and they said, "Oh, I didn't know you were still here." I was beyond furious and went to the front desk with all my stuff. The lady at the desk said I didn't have a reservation, even though I had my paper saying I checked in, my car decal stickers for parking there, and the room key. She said she rented the room out that I was in for the next month. Flabbergasted, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She looked up my information and said, "Oh, I see you didn't book with us but Expedia. We don't partner with them." Still confused as to why the world I was given a room, paid for it, and had issues being in it. She refused to call her manager at 5 AM by that point. So I waited until they got in at 9 AM, demanded a refund, got it, and checked out. No matter how terrified the ordeal seemed, I think it would have ended differently had I not locked the bar on the door. In 2007 I went to India by myself. I was going to a friend's wedding, but first I decided to have some time in Delhi. I was staying at a guest house that was attached to one of the embassies. When I checked into my room late at night, the bathroom window was open, and there were muddy footprints going from the window onto the toilet and into the room. I immediately checked the room for any people, but it was empty. As a woman traveling by myself, it was quite frightening. So, I'm in Honolulu, drunk at a Dave & Buster's at like 1 AM. I decided to go wander around. It's like the most touristy area in the whole world. I'm walking past this bus stop right near the beach and these high school kids ask me if I have a paper. I was like yeah, and they said they'd smoke me out. So I was lime fuck yeah, and we blazed up and just chatted. They had BMX bikes and let me try them out because I told them I used to ride, and that was fun. I thought they were just goofy street kids, so I hung out with them for about an hour or so when we get to Cardboard Box on a dark sidewalk near the docks. Then they tell me that's where they sleep. I was like, that fucking sucks. All of a sudden the kid puts a gun up in my face and I got mugged. They only took my cash, gave me my wallet back, and took my flip-flops. My phone was dead, so let me keep that too. They actually forced me to smoke fucking meth, like WTF. Then I just start walking and they were following about a block behind me for about a mile. I end up walking into the shittiest neighborhood and I feel like I'm about to get mugged all over again. This guy comes up to, I assume he was a pimp. He's like, "What are you doing here?" Then he says to hug this hooker so everyone watching me would think I belonged. I obliged and he then gave me a pair of flip-flops and money for the bus, like he knew what had happened to me. I go to a bus stop and the bus isn't running in the middle of the night. Some guy comes up and tells me it's not safe to be there. We end up chatting and I decide to go hang at the beach with him until morning. We get to the beach and I never told him what happened to me, but I got the feeling they were interconnected somehow and he knew. Well, this big dude comes up to us on a park bench at the beach. They knew each other and went into the bathroom together. He comes out a little while later and told me he just gave the dude a blowjob, and I was like, okay. I guess he was male prostitute and he asked if I wanted one. I was like, no thanks. Then he wanted me to do meth him. Eventually the sun came up and we went swimming and got coffee and I caught a bus and got the fuck out of there. I'm not the brightest pea in the pod, and in 13 MOV in Hawaii I racked up so many fucked up stories. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.